The next key stakeholder that we're going to have a look at are the government. The government does play a critical role, and they are a key stakeholder in terms of the relationship between human resources and each individual organisation and the human resources within each organisation. So government organisations are stakeholders, as I've just said, because the government determines the legal framework. They are the ones who are setting the minimum wage, for example. They are the ones who are setting the conditions around the number of hours of work a week that a full-time worker must have as a maximum expectation. They help solve industrial disputes, so when there's a disagreement between an organisation and its workers, and they have wide-ranging social and economic goals affected by management outcomes. The government is also a stakeholder as an employer because it's responsible for employing so many people in the public sector within Australia. So they play a dual role as a stakeholder, if you will. There are government departments at both federal and state levels that oversee the legislation directly relating to employment relations. Now, the important point is that the legislation in relation to the workplace is ever changing, and for those of you who do economics, you would have gone to some detail in Year 11 and in Year 12 on the role of the Fair Work Commission, how things have changed, work choices in 2005, work choices then been abolished under the Rudd government in the late 2008, and then 2009 the Fair Work Commission establishing the Fair Work Act. There's been significant change to this legislation, and we could go back pre-2005 as well to note key differences. The point being that due to government change and also to change of viewpoints, this legislation does change quite regularly. The government's employment relations goals are to promote the economic prosperity and welfare of the people of Australia. Therefore, it's often contentious about the exact outcomes of their policy. The major government organisation which we'll be focusing on is that of the Fair Work Commission, or the Fair Work Ombudsman, because they are the peak body that was established under the Fair Work Act 2009 to oversee things such as minimum wages, the awards and the key elements of each individual award, and we'll look at some examples of awards in class when we cover this information. But the Fair Work Commission determines and enforces the legal framework for industrial relations. They were previously called the Fair Work Australia, it's now out of the Fair Work Commission. So just a bit more detail on the Fair Work Commission. They're a national, important point to understand, they're national, they're not state-based, they are national-based, and they underpin the Fair Work Act 2009. They facilitate and approve collective bargaining agreements. A collective bargaining is an agreement between all workers within an organisation. And they adjust minimum wages and deal with unfair dismissal claims and workplace disputes. So their goal is very broad, and they do cover many elements of the workplace. The Fair Work Commission replaces existing bodies. It's important to understand that Fair Work Australia doesn't exist anymore as an entity. It's now called the Fair Work Commission. The Australian Fair Pay Commission used to be an organisation that existed, it doesn't anymore. The Workplace Ombudsman is now the Fair Work Ombudsman. So the Fair Work Commission, as I've stated previously, relates to and enforces the Fair Work Act of 2009. And they set things such as a minimum safety net of employment conditions, and there are a number of those minimum standards. They enforce or relate to a system that has collective enterprise bargaining. That'll make more sense shortly. Protection from unfair dismissal for all employees, so a worker must be protected from unfair dismissal from their employer, or by their employer, I should say. Protection for the low-paid worker, i.e. those who are on the minimum wage or close to it. They try to enforce a balance between work and family life, and also the right to be represented in the workplace. The Ombudsman is an independent statutory agency created under the Act 2009, and they're responsible for promoting harmonious, productive and cooperative Australian workplaces. They educate employers and employees about workplace rights and obligations to ensure that they comply with workplace laws. And where it's appropriate, the Fair Work Ombudsman will commence proceedings against an employer, the employee, and or their representatives, so it could be the unions, for example, who breach workplace laws. So it's the job of the Ombudsman to act on elements of breaches of the Fair Work Act on behalf of an employee, or on behalf of an employer, or against the union or against the employer association, to ensure that the Fair Work Act is being abided by as a law or as an act of Parliament. Now we'll go into more detail on the Fair Work Act down the track.